Welcome, everyone, to Awesome Truth, a wrestling book club. I'm your host, Steve Semino, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Walt Schwenk. Hey, Walters.
Hello, Steven. How's it going?
My friend, it is going very well. We are back on Awesome Truth, and today we are continuing our build-up to WrestleMania, Walt, by talking about Cody Rhodes, specifically a Cody Rhodes documentary that came out a little while ago, and we were waiting for a chance to talk about it, and here we go. It's called American Nightmare: Becoming Cody Rhodes. If you're a Peacock subscriber, you may have heard of it. It was a pretty big deal, I think back in the summer of 2023. And I will say, Walt, after the Will Ospreay documentary we watched recently, which was fan-made and cobbled together with duct tape, it was very refreshing to watch a nice, classy WWE presentation.
I mean, it was clear this wasn't a Kickstarter documentary. This wasn't a,
yes. There were bells and whistles in this one. It was wild.
Yeah. Fitting, too, because we just talked about The Rock that we're talking about Cody, so maybe there's a pattern here. I don't know, but
we're giving everybody their time, right? Everyone involved in the main so far gets their moment in the sun.
And Will Ospreay, apparently.
Yeah, Will Ospreay. But yeah, this is, there's been a rush of these Peacock docs. We talked about the Ric Flair one a while back as well, available in our archives, awesometruth.libsyn.com, and the Kurt Angle episode. There's been these WWE branded documentaries that I will say are as lightly branded as possible. Like they're about wrestlers, they're very wrestling centric, but they don't have the WWE logo plastered all over them. I think the idea is probably to sucker in some people just flipping by in Peacock and going, oh, what's this? Oh, it's wrestling. Oh, well, too late. I already clicked play, so I guess I'll watch it.
Yeah, I mean,
at least Angle, because the Angle one was called, and the Angle one had a very vague name too. This one is a little more title's more indicative of the content than the other ones.
I also, just given the nature, I mean, you could put a Kurt Angle documentary in just the Peacock Sports section or documentary section, because
he's a gold medal winner, so he has a life outside of wrestling.
Exactly. Whereas Cody Rhodes, it's like I don't know if his amateur background or high school amateur background really would, necessitate him being in the sports section. You get into WWE pretty quickly in the guy's life. So
yeah, I think he has lines similar to like, wrestling is my life. Wrestling was all I cared about. I only wanted to wrestle. So he doesn't even offer any options beyond that. That was his whole focus from A to Z.
Right. But I mean, if that is the strategy to not brand these WWE, so hard, then they lost me on that one, because, it was still obviously very much a WWE production.
I think I'm just coming from, our initial foray into these, which was WWE 365, like these things with WWE in the title, like where you couldn't deny that it was, and we were also watching those on the WWE network. So this might just be the fact that when they're on Netflix someday, they may just lean a little less. They might just not have WWE in the title of everything, like they might have their own section where they feel a little more less encumbered to put it to front load that on everything and just make things look a little. I think they wouldn't mind to catch some stray viewers along the way,
Yeah, I'd have to look at the thumbnail again in the meta. Sorry, not to be so in the weeds on.
I think it's interesting. I think how they position these things, to try and market them is something where we've talked about so much minutia on this show. We might as well discuss that minutia as well.
Well, I'm too close to it because, obviously, I see Cody Rhodes. And I already know what it's about. But if without a WWE insignia on it, and you see Cody Rhodes, and maybe you've heard of Dusty Rhodes, maybe there's some intrigue that you just sucks you in a way that if you had the WWE logo on it, you'd be like, next.
I think at the very least they don't want you to think it's like Raw, I think they might want you to think it's not just a thing of wrestling matches, a show of an hour of matches. I think it's at least trying to look like a little more highbrow than that.
Oh, I mean the presentation is definitely highbrow for
sure.
It is.
It looks, like we said, it looks great. It's so well done. This one also has the interesting idea, which I don't think I've seen in any of these, of having interstitial filmed little transitions, with Cody in them, picking things up out of dirt, basically, or sand constantly, which gets a little old. This is a long documentary. This is a 2-hour feature film length documentary. So those interstitials get old by the end a little bit. But I was like, wow, this is like new. This is something they made pains to film and create for this.
Yeah, I mean, there's actual money that's put into those things. That's not like, you have to film in this Mad Max universe. I mean, might have been mostly CG.
I think they have a backdrop there, but still, like someone had to make a backdrop. Someone had to devote their time and energy to that.
Sand felt real.
Yeah, they had to get sand. There's no doubt about that. They definitely had to hire a sand guy to dump a bunch of sand there. So
I will say, having done stuff like this before, getting into minutia again, those stupid little scenes go a long way. But the difference though is like WWE and Cody Rhodes, like this guy has been filmed from day one of his life, and every Dusty thing has been filmed. I don't think they were really short on footage.
Yes.
Where they needed this like connector, this like just like amorphous, like avant-garde like kind of thing.
It was artsy for sure.
Yeah, maybe artsy is the better word for it.
Artsy for wrestling, artsy for that, artsy for their typical, routines.
Right. But just not like found footage or interview footage. It's just like C-roll or Z-roll or I don't even know what to call it.
They leaned on it. Like I said, by the fifth time he's bending over in the sand to pick up a belt or a photo, you're just like, okay, I understand the metaphor here or whatever. I don't know if I need to see this again, but it is, it's something. It sets it apart visually from their other documentaries. It's like, okay, to me, it felt like this is the most important thing we're going to put out there outside of wrestling programming all year. It had that sort of shine to it.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear that they invested in this thing, and it showed. And it was.
I mean, heels Stephen Amell doing the narration, right? I mean, you can't break the bank any harder than that.
Well, we can talk about that now, actually, because obviously, great call. People know who this guy is.
Sure, I guess wrestling fans do, and heels fans and Arrow fans. I do feel like that's a what's it called? What's the circles called that overlap?
Venn diagram?
A Venn diagram. I feel like there's a pretty big middle for heels fans, Arrow fans, and wrestling fans. I do feel like there's a lot of crossover there.
Well, and that's okay.
And you're hitting that big Venn diagram, so that's good.
Right. I mean, this isn't Ryan Reynolds, sure, but like what I mean though is like obviously they could have had a lot of different people just VO this stupid thing, and not that it was stupid, but like. It didn't have to be Stephen Amell, so it was clear that they invested. When they kind of like when they get Michael Rappaport to do these things, I'm like,
that was the name I was thinking of.
I'm just like, yeah, you didn't need. Like, it shows that you wanted to put something extra into this, but like, did you need Michael Rappaport? No, but like, you paid him anyway, so.
Stephen Amell knows the product too, so you're getting someone, and he knows Cody. So you're getting someone with intimate who isn't just reading lines off a script. He actually knows what he's talking about, which helps, I think.
Which got a little loopy when he started talking about himself as like the objective.
That was some fourth wall breaking that wasn't really like necessary or valuable to have. It was just
I'm just like this was odd.
It's like, should you have brought in a guest narrator for that one segment just to not do that? I suppose I don't really know, but
or just be less weird about it. Like he was like, and then this.
Yours truly was at Raw, and I was like, okay, man, great, good for you. Glad you got to be on a SummerSlam.
Right. I mean, like, he was marginally part of the story, I guess, but
yeah. Not really. But he was there, and I think it also just reinforces what we're saying, that like they didn't just slap a voice on it or a name on it. They got someone with resonance to the story, for better or for worse, which just again reinforces, I think, the interest they had in doing a Cody doc, in telling Cody's story the right way, and in loading it up with all the little nooks and crannies to make it feel a little special.
Yeah, so production-wise, great. Footage-wise, great.
Yeah, and the great point you made, too. Like, Cody really is maybe the most, I don't know about of all time, but he's got to be on the short list of, like, people from their, their teen years who have footage on screen that you can lean back to, and, like, you're not wanting for a single thing. Like, the story is right there. You don't even have to hunt hard to find it. It's all in the archives somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, this guy's entire career was in front of a camera.
Yeah.
So, and that WWE owns, well, I would say all of it, but most of it.
And they don't need to lie about him being polished. You know, that was one of the things, like, because they leaned really hard in the beginning on Cody gives Dusty's eulogy. And does he give Dusty's eulogy? Is that right? He does, right?
He does, but that was during his career, though.
Yes. But then he also,
Speech.
inducts him into the Hall of Fame. That's the first thing they talk about. Like, that was like his coming out moment. When I believe he's like 18, 19 years old, or maybe maybe he's a little older than that, but he's young, and he comes and he inducts Dusty, and everyone gushes over how preternaturally talented he is. And it does. And when you actually see him speak, you're like, yeah, this kid's pretty good. You know, like maybe he's not as good as they're saying, but you can see the seeds of what to come. And it's not an example of them, you know, making something out of nothing or puffing themselves up or puffing their guy up. You're like, yeah, guy's pretty good. Like it's all there, just waiting to sort of blossom.
Interesting too that he like spent a year he had a sabbatical in Hollywood to like learn craft.
Yes.
I didn't realize like it's kind of backwards. Most wrestlers usually just wrestle and then start like dipping into acting, but like it. I mean, I think it helped. It seemed to help early on. I mean, like you can't say that one led to the other necessarily, but I think just being around Dusty and having like scene work and learning how to project and be a character, like, it's no wonder that he was like he was impressing people just as like a person speaking.
Yeah. He's never been my favorite promo, but there is always a passion and a genuineness there, like you can tell he knows what he's doing and he's giving it to you pretty straight. Even when he was doing Stardust, the passion at least was still, the genuineness was less so because he was playing a weird Goldust clone. But the enthusiasm and the commitment has never been up for debate. And a lot of that probably comes from being Dusty's son and sort of being raised on it. But I'm sure it couldn't hurt to take some classes and like just think about that side of it, like the wrestling and the general talking element and the projecting and all that probably all came naturally. But some of the specifics, it probably couldn't hurt to get some reps in there.
Yeah, but it's funny too because like obviously this doc revisits this guy's career, and a lot of my viewing from like 10 years ago with him and Legacy and stuff like that. I mean, maybe it's more than 10 years ago at this point, but yeah, that was like his big coming out thing was the Legacy stable, and coming off the heels of that with dashing Cody Rhodes versus like Ted Jr. I think everybody was just like, oh, this Ted guy has it, and Cody, I guess, is just like there.
Is that true? Is that was what people thought?
I think that was the narrative coming out of it. Like, I don't think anyone was like, once Legacy broke up, like, oh, Cody's gonna be the breakout, and like Ted had more of a look too, which I think helped. But it's just so funny thinking, like, watching those scenes and then like. And then seeing dashing Cody Rhodes be talked about in such a way where I'm like, at the time it wasn't necessarily like, oh yeah, of course this is gonna be great. It's like I don't think anyone necessarily booked him to do anything beyond that. Like,
yeah, and it's great that Ted's not even in this at all.
Yeah, right.
They don't even, and this you sort of touched on something that I think this doc does really, really well. It avoids the minutia of all that kind of stuff, it like, because I was at least waiting for them to talk about his feud with Big Show, where they had their little like for the IC bell, where Big Show steps to the table at Mania, I believe. And like some of these matches he had that weren't necessarily big, but in the context of his rise to relative importance in the business, they were big. And the only match they really touch on until he becomes, his return is the Shield match, against Roman and Seth with Goldust. And that is great because that is honestly, if you're talking Cody Rhodes to now, when he's a main eventer, winning 2 Rumbles in a row, going to Mania, we don't need to hear about that shit. That's all extraneous. That's all in the past. It is relevant to really specific wrestling nerds, but it doesn't really contribute to the story to focus on little tidbits. Like, I'm glad, but that tag match does, because that was the closest thing you had to a high level main event style feud, even though it wasn't the main, but you know what I mean? It was really important. So I was happy that they ignored all the other stuff entirely and said, let's keep it broad strokes. Let's keep it a higher level, and let's really only drop down to talk about that one match. And even then only for like 5 or 6 minutes.
And obviously that match was in the context of his family and
yes,
Dusty,
of
and
course.
and all that. So like,
which is what made it so great. They incorporated all of it in so well.
I don't think it's revisionist history to say that was a breakout moment, because that, like, the Shield had not lost before that match.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a pretty big thing.
Because that was sort of the hook of the match too. Is like you're like, okay, the story is that Dustin and Cody should just win, but I think we're also like, but they really don't want the Shield to lose. So like, there's a chance the Shield just runs over them because they're so clearly high on those guys. So I think that was sort of if I remember correctly, that was part of the crux figure. Like I know where the story should go, but there's a chance that doesn't go that way just because of logistics and wrestling and all that.
Well, I mean, just the fact that they the Shield was consistently beating Daniel Bryan and CM Punk and Randy Orton's, and
they were clearly invested. There was no denying that at that point.
So to give these two the rub there was a pretty big thing.
It's also funny that Moxley was involved in that, though obviously not in the match, and they don't mention it at all. They talk about AEW a lot in this documentary, but they casually just don't mention Dean Ambrose at all there.
Right. Well, I mean,
not that they need to, but it's just, if there was ever a time to remind us about Dean Ambrose, that could have been it. And they're like, nah, it's fun. We're good.
You're taking that bionic elbow from Dusty doesn't necessarily help sell that Cody is a star.
It was a big moment, though.
Yeah, it was a huge
Dean
moment.
Sold it like $1 million, if I remember correctly.
I mean, the one thing I agree with you, the minutia of like his early career, and we don't have to talk about Rhodes Scholars. We don't talk about.
I mean, that's the one thing I wish we could have talked about.
Like Cody has a mustache.
I enjoyed Rhodes Scholars very much. I wouldn't have been mad.
Oh, you mean the Damian Sandow gimmick before Mizdow that people actually cared about? Yeah.
The team, they weren't called, you remember, they weren't just called Rhodes Scholars. They kept calling them Team Rhodes Scholars, which always drove me insane. I was like, you don't need the team part. They're just Rhodes Scholars. That's fine.
Yeah, that's weird. I did not know that, but
it was very weird. It annoyed me back in the day, and it still obviously prickles me to this day.
I think, though, there was more to be explored with Legacy. The fact that he was paired with other like-minded stars that were also put in similar situations to him and having big shoes to fill. Like there was more to kind of uncover with that. Also, the fact that had he not been paired with Randy Orton, again, minutia aside, we don't want to go into the weeds, but this guy was Cody, I should say, Cody and Ted were scheduled to face DX, and they got wins over Shawn Michaels and Triple H on a pay-per-view. And it's there's more to be explored in the sense that this was such a pivotal moment in this guy's career, because he could have just been Dusty Rhodes' son in perpetuity, until they gave him the legacy angle and the stable. And that was I don't know. I think we kind of brushed upon that so quickly, and really that's one of his biggest things in his career.
Yeah. I mean, they do sort of put the cart before the horse a little bit, in that they treat Cody where Cody is now not as a foregone conclusion, but they don't really A does lead to B, lead to C, lead to D, because like you said, wrestling can be very fickle, and they don't really discuss how there's Ricky the Dragon's son and all these other legacy type people not in the legacy stable, but sons and daughters of wrestlers who don't make it, and most of them aren't very talented, but some of them are, and they don't make it because of circumstances, timing, I'm sure political bullshit backstage, but they a lot of the times they don't get that initial thing like legacy, like you're saying, where they actually sort of cement themselves in people's minds as legitimate wrestlers, because then it is a lot easier to, even if you don't go to the top right away, you at least people know you as a valuable entity on their screens, and if you do make the leap someday, it all just makes sense. Whereas, but if you don't get that thing, there's only so long you can trade on being just literally Ricky the Dragon's son. That gets boring in 10 minutes. And it's okay, what else you got? And a lot of times they can't do a legacy stable for everybody, so most of them just like a fart in the wind, they just disappear. And Cody obviously was lucky enough to get that timing where there were a couple other guys who genuinely had that claim to being the sons of former wrestlers, and it really just put them together in a way that not everyone else gets to experience.
Yeah, but also too, Ricky the Dragon's son had to kind of live on an island, whereas the legacy is stables, you're calling out the fact that these are all legacy stars, so as a group it's like-minded individuals, and you're also paired with like a former heavyweight champion, so you're a heater for like Randy Orton, and so there's a lot more there that is really unique, despite the fact that being legacy, like Charlotte Flair chimes in and is like, yeah, it's really tough to be Ric Flair's daughter. It's like, yeah, no shit. But like,
for so many reasons, probably.
Like, yeah, sure. It's a great bite from the perfect person, but like also like, I expect her to say that because that's why you're in the doc in the first place, is to give that perspective. But she doesn't get that. Like, and so I don't know. There's something to be said about like leaning into it and in a heel way. And also, like, just like skyrocketed his ass right to the, like, not main event, but like, if you're next to Randy Orton in 2009, you're in the main event. Like, so.
It speaks. And Orton's in it. I think Cody does give him his praise when, a couple times in the doc. But like Orton, it made perfect sense back then because Orton was so young, but also so, like you said, already a veteran, so, and had this shine to him and this importance that he could anchor a group like that. And it wasn't just like, it wasn't three punks just, throwing jabs at people. It was like you said, this is a world champion and his two buddies, and they're starting shit. And it worked in a way that most of those wouldn't work because most of them don't have an Orton as the anchor. Like, Orton is such a unique guy in recent wrestling history, and we all take him for granted. And he's, maybe he's not he's no one's favorite wrestler ever, but he got the evolution rub early, which helped him a ton too. But he ran with that so hard and became this like important guy. Like he said, putting Cody next to him gives Cody the shine just from existing in his orbit.
Yeah, and
just not many guys that are like that at that age,
But it was a good idea too, like just like to put them together with.
Also, because Cody and Ted Ted was never a good speaker, and then Cody, like I said, even if he had authenticity, he didn't have a ton else. He was 22 years old or whatever, I don't think he had a ton to say at that point.
Yeah, right. I mean, the DiBiase posse, as much as I loved it, was what it was.
It was not long for this earth. It was not a sustainable, long-lasting style gimmick.
Yeah.
We haven't even talked about the other side of this, which is we talked about how Cody is, a wealth of footage on him. You're doing 30, 40 minutes on Dusty to start this, and that's, Dusty is the easiest person in the world to make a documentary about. Like, I'm surprised there aren't 100 Dusty docs, just because everything he represents, his whole gimmick, the fact that he was consistently this fat, lovable underdog for 2 decades. Like, he has such a cachet to him and such his own authenticity that, like, just putting him in a Cody doc, it's authentically part of Cody's story, but you can just ramble about Dusty for half an hour and everybody loves it.
Yeah, I mean, there aren't 1,000 Dusty docs like there are. You said we watched the Ric Flair doc. I'm like, which one? Yes,
there's way more. But the other side of Ric Flair is Dusty Rhodes. For a decade.
I'm not saying you shouldn't have that many Dusty Rhodes docs. I'm just saying, like,
yeah, there's not, and it's a surprising dearth of for a very colorful character who could certainly support a few.
Right, but I'm glad they didn't overstay their welcome with Dusty Rhodes, because like they quickly pivoted to like Dusty the father, Dusty the like NXT, the father of NXT, and that was kind of interesting too to see Cody talk about that, because like everybody talks about Dusty from the NXT feeder system with like the utmost love and respect, and just to hear Cody be like, yeah, so I was suffering creatively while this guy was like giving all these champions, including the guy I'm facing at WrestleMania, like all the tools to be stars. And it's like, that's an interesting dichotomy that like, obviously it's not like I've never thought of that, but like I've never really thought of those things all in one sentence that this doc kind of like stitches together, which is interesting. It's interesting to hear that kind of bitterness and resent. Like, what the fuck, dude? Like,
yeah, and
give me the tools, not Roman Reigns.
And that's the second part of the first, and there's a first part of it where Cody talks about, as he gives that Hall of Fame speech and he wows everybody, he realizes that Vince loves him and he's going to get called up too soon. And I guess there might be a little bit of like looking back, adding some commentary to that, but he seemed like a smart guy. I bet he also probably did realize like, like I'm going to be on or his dad told him like, you better get ready, buddy. Like, you're going to be on TV soon. So he seems like a very smart guy who would understand that. And I think it ties to the NXT thing, because those guys in NXT had time to work out the kinks and figure it out and work under Triple H and Dusty and now Michaels, like these guys who really care about them and nurture them and help them develop characters. And especially in the recent years, you would show up on Raw and you'd have a character already and you would just start going, like there wasn't even anything. Whereas Cody shows up and his gimmick is, I'm Cody Rhodes, Dusty's son, as he says, right. And then he has to figure it out on the fly. Like, okay, what am I going to do? How am I going to stand out? And also, what shitty ideas are they going to saddle me with at it, that I can't really say no to? And so, like, I can see how, especially when NXT gets cooking, you look at it and go, God, I sort of wish I was just here. Like, low pressure, low stakes. My dad's there, and he's giving me all these good ideas. Like, it does seem pretty enticing, I bet.
Yeah, I mean, but what the real question is, if he didn't just like straight up quit or Dusty didn't pass away, would he have lobbied to go back to NXT? Like, I feel like at that point, at that time, it would be really tough to recover from that.
Yeah.
Because like that's what it sounded like. What he was saying, it's like, oh man, I would have loved to have been in NXT. It's like, yeah, but you're already there, like,
and you've been there for so long at that point.
Kevin Owens being in NXT makes sense, relatively speaking, but like to go from Stardust back to NXT, I mean, obviously in hindsight, it all worked out to a certain degree, and he made the right calls. But it's like the way he was talking about it sounded like if I was still there, my dad was still alive, I would have really benefited from NXT. He's like, yeah, but you would have never gone backwards. Like,
yeah,
I don't know.
I mean, that's something that the doc, brings to light, whether it, purposely means to or not, that I was reminded of, and it just adds a holy shit element to how we got to this point, which is when Cody left WWE, post Stardust, and he went on the Indies. I remember being like, oh, that's good for him, like, because other guys had done that around that point. Like I think that started a little run. Like Drew obviously did it, and Zack Ryder ended up doing it, and like obviously Moxley. Some of them just went to AEW to a certain point, but he might have been the first guy to do that, and he certainly. But it seemed for a while there like he was going to be just the king of the indies, like Ryder turned out to be now, like Cardona is, where he's just like, I'm on the indies and I'm doing great and I'm everywhere, but like I don't know what's next for him, like, and certainly not a Rhodes-esque return to WWE probably, but it just always seemed like even when Cody was putting it together, we saw him at Wrestle Kingdom in Japan, Wrestle Kingdom 12, like he was in ROH, he did all this stuff, and you're like, okay, he's doing really well, but at what scale and with what end game and like what happens next? And obviously he helped AEW and that was a huge boost for him, but it's amazing that he went from that to this, like it's a perfect story, and it just seems so impossible when he stopped being Stardust. Because even when you watch those clips of him on the Indies, like everyone's pumped to see him at these little shows. That's because he's Cody Rhodes, former WWE superstar. Like he's got the black hair, like he's got some presence, some gravitas, but he's not like capital S star. He's a guy. He's like, it's a cool guy to see at your local show. And the fact that in 7-8 years or whatever, he went from that to 2 Manias, 2 Rumbles, and like about to win the title is mind blowing a little bit.
This is why I think he's a really smart guy, promoter, guy, performer. Like, I think him just being king of the indies is kind of a gross understatement of like what was happening. The list, I think, was a really smart move where it's like, oh, great, now I'm out of this stupid like company. Here's my list of matches, like dream matches that are going to get people excited. Because like he had Kurt Angle on there and all these other like Roderick Strong, the Bucks, and it's like he franchised himself in many ways because like even he said, he's like, listen, I wouldn't take a deal with TNA or New Japan. Like the deal was, if you use me, you like, I'm like still a free agent, and it allowed him to have matches like these quote unquote dream matches and still be associated with all these other companies in a meaningful way, and not like just like go to like, in a earlier era, he would have just went to TNA and like, then now you're like the king of nothing. Great. No offense, TNA, but like, yeah, but like also like he wasn't just going to indies. He was like the ROH champion. He was at New Japan, like Wrestle Kingdom. These aren't like just like bingo halls. Like they kind of add like Cardona had a few bites, like, oh yeah, he was like wrestling in front of 20 people. I'm like, I don't know how often that actually happened. He was pretty strategic. He had a plan, and he used social media to kind of really boost his like bookings and his promotability, I guess. And like, I don't know. I think that was more cerebral than just like, oh, I'm just gonna do this thing. It's like, you know, and it shows too, because All In wasn't just like a thing an independent wrestler does. Like that's a thing that someone who wants to make a lot of money and like build something does, if that makes sense.
No, you're right, and I think the key is that he set his sights really high. I think it's I think that's a very good point. Like he through that list, like he made it clear, like I'm not just gonna show up at shows just to show up at shows. Like I want to work with these amazing talents, and I want to sell myself accordingly and position myself accordingly, where I'm not just working. Even if he was traveling around a lot, the end game was always very clear that there was, in that sense, that there was going to be something big he was building to. It wasn't just farting around week to week. So, and I think also from what you hear, from what I've read in previous, I think in the Bucks book even, like his relationship with, like, I think people with the Bucks, I don't think he was always like best buddies with them, but he knew who to partner with professionally. Like he's like, these guys are go-getters, I'm a go-getter, we want to start shit, let's team up even if we're not best friends, because this is going to work out for everybody. Like they're the biggest names in tag team wrestling, I have this huge name in singles wrestling and legacy and all that stuff. Like let's join forces because we can sell ourselves better that way. And it seemed like he was always really good at that, whereas I don't think other people don't dream that big, or maybe don't have the capacity or the willpower or the past cachet to do so. But he seemed like he knew what his worth was, and he's like, and he probably knew, like, I can trade on this name to a certain extent. Like I need to put up or shut up at a certain point, but like people are gonna want to have a Rhodes at their show. People are gonna take a call from a Cody Rhodes no matter what, and I can open some doors that other people probably can't open just because of who I am and where I come from.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of. It's funny you bring up the Bucks book, because I was thinking about that a lot. I'm like, do people like this guy?
I don't think they I don't think they hate him. I just don't know if he's like anyone's best bud,
Well, it just seems like he's like for people like the Bucks, this guy's like Mr. Joe Business.
Yeah.
Which is like, I mean, look, they all benefited and everybody's happier as a result of partnering. Like, I don't think anyone's like, fuck this guy, like, for any decision he's made.
No,
but
like the AEW people are like, thanks for starting other companies so we can all get Tony Khan's money, That's great.
Right. I mean, yeah, he got richer, they got richer, everybody wins. So, like, I don't think anyone's like, fuck this guy. But, like, the way they talk about it, I'm like, what was that like? Because I think about that now. It's like people, I think, like him, WWE. Like, there's a lot of his old buds. But then there's, like, do the new people like him? Is it, like, do the dusty people like him? Like, I don't know. Like, does he come off like that in WWE locker rooms? Or was that just kind of like a weird PWG situation where who's the guy in the suit walking into this like 400 person venue, like, what I mean? Like that was like the attitude, and
I mean, the vibe that almost every talking head gives off in this, it's either legends like Taker or Hogan, weirdly, or other people just talking about his professionalism and his understanding of the business and all that, or it's contemporaries who talk about him in like you said, in sort of weirdly objective terms, like Miz being like, Cody's good at this or that, but like it doesn't seem like there's a lot of pals on there being like, my good old buddy Cody, like I love Cody, he's the best guy. Like it just doesn't seem like, and maybe he cultivates that, maybe that's just who he is, but it just, you don't get the sense that he is out with the boys pounding beers and being like a good old dude. Like you get the sense that he thinks about it as business, and he loves his family obviously, and like he hangs out with them probably a lot, and just maybe doesn't endear himself to everyone in that sort of way, which is honestly, it's work. Like that's totally, I think that's probably pretty smart on his end. Like just show up and do your work and make everyone look good, and then go home and like have a drink and go to bed,
or have a whiskey in a growler with some Powerade or Gatorade.
That's the only mention of like boozing or hanging out he talks about in the whole doc, is that he was getting super fucked up on Gatorade and whiskey because he was so depressed.
Yeah, I learned a thing or two from the Shawn Michaels tutelage of trying to get fired because you
just getting drunk. But I couldn't imagine what, like, someone must have known, like, man, Cody's really enjoying that tumbler, isn't he? Like, what's going on? Yeah. He's swaying slightly more than he was an hour ago.
Although, to be fair, if I went to a writer begging them to like write something for me, and then they give me the hand to the face and their computer's turned off and they pretend type, even if that's half true, it's still just like, oh god, I
Could
would
you
probably
imagine
start.
the person who could in theory write for WWE is someone like you and I, like probably high, maybe like someone with more of a creative background than us, but like in theory, it's normal dudes like us, and Cody Rhodes is coming up to us and being like, "Hello, it's Stephen Walt. Like, I have an idea of our character," and we just tell him to shut up and like put a hand on his face. Like, where do you get the balls to do that?
Yeah,
That's wild.
I don't know who that person is because I've heard that story before. Do
I
we?
know.
I
I
haven't,
must. It must have been. I've heard it too. I don't know where we've heard it, but I also was like, I know this from somewhere.
but like, man, what? But at the same time, though, like I think the more diplomatic answer would be like, listen, talk to Hunter, talk to Vince. Like, I don't have any say in this. I'm just writing like half baked jokes or promotional lines for like KFC, like
Yep.
with wrestlers. Like, do not come to me for ideation. I am
Yes.
not an ideas man.
I'm
I'm
trying to think what
literally.
Jeremy Piven and Ken Jeong should say tonight. I don't have any mental power beyond that.
Oh God, if it was the guest star, the Raw rotating door of guest stars era, then yeah, they definitely didn't have time to ideate for Stardust.
That made me think though, like this is one of those stories where because obviously Triple H is in charge now of creative, and like a lot of people in the last decade or so, especially the NXT people, certainly credit him for being a more thoughtful ear and helping them come up with their characters and giving them ideas. This is distinctly not a Triple H story, Like I don't know how he feels about Triple H from this documentary or from other things I've read, but it's not like Triple H believed in me, Vince didn't believe in me, and we overcame adversity. It's like I left because it sounds like everyone was just didn't give a shit, Nobody believed in me. Everybody was like, you're, the 15th most important person at best on this show. So I left and I earned my way back without any help from anybody within this structure. And I think that's a really fun story too, because like, not that I don't like H, certainly more than the monstrous Vince McMahon at this point, but it is nice to hear a story where like, it's not even like he's one of H's guys, It's like, I'm my own man, I do my own thing, and I came back here because I'm that good and they wanted me back.
Well, he said after the writer story that he went right to Hunter.
But then Hunter told him, like, he was like, work hard or something. It wasn't like, it sounded like a real platitude. It didn't sound like Hunter was really giving him any in depth insight that I thought.
Well, I thought he went to Hunter because he actually had like power creatively. I mean, obviously back then it was like, it all stops with one man.
Yeah. I don't think Hunter, I mean, whatever he had, it wasn't like it saved him either. It didn't really help at all. So.
No, it didn't. But, again,
yeah.
it all seemed to work out.
It worked out great. Yeah. It's, and now we're here. So like now that we've seen this documentary, what do you think about Cody? Because like the documentary ends in a real sort of dumb fashion. Like it ends with him losing at Mania and everyone being like, "Oh shucks," but I'll be back, and obviously he is back now, so it's good timing for us to watch it because it does seem like they're going to finish the story. But what do you think, like with this documentary and just where we are now in 2024? What are your thoughts on Cody as like a superstar, capital S, in wrestling?
Part of this doc kind of reminded me of like why this guy deserves to be the champion and the head of WrestleMania. And it's so stupidly inherent in his life story why this makes sense. Like, it's not stranger than fiction, but it's just like you can't script this better in many ways. And, part of me was reminded of like why this story is worth finishing. Part of me is also like, I'm too close to him because like I'm also reminded of all the moments throughout his career where he wasn't slated to be anything, and there was reasons why I probably thought that before, and I mean obviously he's overcome a lot of that, but at the end of the day though it was like this weird dissonance in my head with like all the times that he was just struggling in the mid card and I never saw it. Like there's certain people, like even when Cena was winning the U.S. championships, I'm like, oh yeah, this guy's strap a rocket to his ass. Like it's gonna happen. And then it happened for many years, much to the fans' chagrin. But so that being said, it's like I just like I don't know. It's hard for me because I don't know his Q rating outside of wrestling, but I have to say it's it makes sense, and I don't know who else you really push at this point.
Yeah, I would say it is a weird mix of organic and super planned out, like because of course the son, like without in the total abstracts, of course the son of Dusty Rhodes, a returning wrestler back from what do they kept calling him in this, the alternative company or something like that. Like they have some name where they clearly don't want to say the competition. They call them the alternative company over and over, which I thought was really funny. And I guess that is sort of true. The AEW is the alternative company.
Yeah.
But someone from that their competition who comes back, who's seasoned and savvy and has gotten all this training elsewhere and made a name for himself, comes back and topples their biggest heel in a decade. Like, that's a good story. And but it also is like of course, like Sammy couldn't do it. Brian had to work so hard to get his spot. Like, there's all these other or more organic people that have either had their shot against Roman or in the past have had similar stories, and they had to fight so hard to get these spots. Meanwhile, Cody wins the Rumble twice and gets too many main events. And you're like, okay, well, of course it's easier for Cody because of all the things I just mentioned. But at the same time, people do love him. Like, people are pop for him, and he sells merch, and he's popular, and people love, if they didn't love his AEW, run, they love that he helped start AEW and that he did all these other things in wrestling. So there's a natural interest in him, and I feel like adoration for him that sort of supplements the other stuff and makes it feel more genuine, where it's like, okay, I get that, like, this just makes so much sense as the guy who beats Roman in an annoying way, but also, like, I can't deny that Cody deserves it. I can't deny that he has worked so hard to get here, and if this is his reward, how could you say this is not earned?
I mean, can we all just have this lasting thought? What a great fucking call it was to jump ship.
Yeah, oh my God. Whew. The timing, too. Like, couldn't have picked better time. I know, like, he helped make that timing even more so, but, like, the bloodline was rising. Like, there was just so much turning in their favor, but it wasn't so clear until he left that, like, wow, because no one even thought him leaving was going to be this big of a deal. I think people scoffed at it. Like, you were a big fish in a small pond, maybe, and now you want to be a medium fish in a big pond. Like, is that smart, Cody? And then it turns out it was brilliant.
Well, just like also too, since him leaving, I mean, AEW has just suffered thing after thing, like setback after setback and injury and all this nonsense.
Self-inflicted and just circumstantial, like just a lot of stuff that is not to their benefit.
I don't know if he was the glue. I don't know if he would have helped that situation as an EVP. I don't know if he would have been able to manage Punk or the Elite or be a bridge. But the fact of the matter is he left and that happened, and he just reaps the benefit of being a big star, and they kind of just like flounder a little bit, and they still haven't quite recovered from that. Yeah. But also he gives a lot of rub to the Elite. He gave a lot of rubs to MJF. He has a whole mini stable of wrestlers that he gave a lot to. So everybody kind of, it was great for him, and his, I think people still are benefiting from his time in AEW.
Yeah, like you said, I mean, maybe someday we'll get a tell-all that really explains what he did and how he contributed to the rise of the company beyond what we already know. But, like you said, the ins and outs, the day-to-day, like who knows how much he could have stemmed this, changed this, whatever. But timeline-wise and everything, like you're saying, like it's pretty clear that like when he was there, even if his feuds weren't great and even if his, everything about him wasn't pristine, things were on the upswing. And then he left and things are on the downswing. And like it's probably not a direct relation to that, but it's just hard to ignore where they're going and where he's going now as a person, as a member of the company. Like it is wild, and you got to give him an unknown amount of credit for that, and like you said, at the very least, credit for reading the tea leaves really well and saying, you know what, like, I'm not getting what I need here, I'm going to go somewhere else. Like, that's the whole point of competition, having two companies. Like, we fetishize all the guys who go from WWE to AEW, like, ooh, you're going to have freedom now. But now you see him go back, you're like, oh, like, and it's not going to work out for, like, Andrade or any of those guys. Like, you can just tell, like, they're just going to be whatever. But for certain people in certain circumstances, going back to the bigger company probably makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, I mean, hey, look, it's worked out for him.
Yeah. More than, it couldn't have been. Like I said, it still blows my mind that like the guy who, like, I went to a Dynamite a few years ago, and he was fighting like Anthony Ogogo or whatever.
Oh,
and I was like, I'm gonna go
Jesus.
take a big poop during this match. Like, I don't care. Like, truly the lamest thing that I could not care less about. And now he's at a Mania main event, and I'm like, I'm pretty pumped for this main event. You know?
Yeah.
Just telling me a couple years ago this would be what happened, I wouldn't believe it. I'd be like, that's insane. How could that possibly ever come to be?
But it does give hope for people who have left for creative differences. Like, it's not just like, oh, I'm going to come back and I'm screwed. Like, this is precedent. Like, just jumping ship from time to time creatively can be rewarding and can benefit you greatly. Like, like if Swerve was to ever go back to WWE, like, I mean, I don't know if he's necessarily the guy they're going to put against Roman Reigns, but like,
yep.
Before there was reasons to not be there, and now those reasons are more, I mean, I assume are pretty much gone, and so therefore, like, it's not a bad thing for even stars of Cody's level to, like, at AEW, to like jump back and see what happens, because it's not just like, you just trust that they're not just going to completely botch it or just bury you.
Change of scenery, and absence makes the heart go fonder, and all those cliches, like someone plying their trade somewhere else, all of a sudden looks a little more enticing, and you want to bring them back. And, if they're good, then that's even better, because then when they get back, they run with it, and maybe you got something there. So, Well, it's a good documentary. Like we said, it's a great conversation. Cody's a fascinating person, well-spoken, articulate on his own career and others' career, and just like I said, they put their money where their mouth is on this doc, because it's a really, really well-made doc. Maybe the best, put together one of anything we've watched for this show. So for that alone, it's long. Again, 2 hours is a long time to watch any sort of wrestling programming that isn't, a good pay-per-view. But I would say it's a treat for sure. I really enjoyed it, and I think, it got me excited for his upcoming Mania, hopefully win. Like, it feels like it's time to do it, and this thing is a little less dated now that he's hopefully about to win again. You're like, okay, they are going to do what they said they were going to do a year ago.
Yeah, I mean, a year ago we were talking about this, and it was like, I can't believe they didn't have him win. And now it's like, it actually almost makes it better that he didn't win, which is, I guess, what they were kind of banking on this entire time.
I guess. I don't want to give him too much credit.
No,
it seemed like they were going with Rock 2 weeks ago. But.
Right, but because he didn't win last year, it's like the fans like revolted, and so that's some of his mark ultimately.
And honestly, I will give them credit for the idea that if you lay multiple layers of groundwork, if plan A doesn't work, you should have a plan B that you can switch to, like it shouldn't, plan B shouldn't be the emergency plan, plan B should be, well, we also have this going, like Sammy last year could have been plan B. Like, well, if shit really hits the fan and we give it to Sammy sort of out of nowhere, it's going to still work great because everyone loves him, and this year when they switched to Dwayne, they quickly realized that probably wasn't a good idea. And if he was plan B, still pretty great plan B. Like, kudos to them for having it in place in the first place.
Right, because there was talk of like, how is Cody going to win the crowd back after Sammy? And he seemed to overcome it, unlike The Rock.
Yeah. Yes. So that's where I do give H&M credit, because they do seem to. It's good to have a lot of options. It's working out in their favor big time, and we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit because Mania is still a month away, but it seems to be setting up real nicely. So
yeah, it's not given he's going to win. Exactly.
Yeah, we could be back in a few weeks just doing an emergency episode talking about how shitty that all was. But I'm optimistic. It's just this at the very least, this reminds me, like, they see money in him, like it's not just organic. Well, the fans won't shut up, so we're going to give him the belt. It's like, we back this. This is a corporate backed entity. This is the full power of our company is willing to get behind this guy if it all works out. So.
This isn't Daniel Bryan.
No, it's not. He's not going to be facing Kane at the April pay-per-view, I'll tell you that much. I think they'll have a little bit of a better plan in place.
He hopefully might.
Yeah, we'll see. Again, not to get at myself. Kane is the emergency, pull lever thing, even though he's fucking 60 years old now. So, no, if you say no, Kane might just show up and ruin your day. But let's hope he does not.
Yes.
Well, if you want more on the Mania build, The Rock, all these other things, any episodes that we have in the past, you can find them all at our archives, awesometruth.libsyn.com, for new episodes and old. If you want to find them on your phone and your other devices, you can subscribe to us, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever podcasts are delivered, we are there. Walt, great to talk to you about Cody. And yeah, we'll keep, I don't know what we're going to do next, but Mania is coming up, and we'll probably find some stuff that is somewhat relevant. Probably a watch along of some other Mania bullshit, right?
Yeah, or watch along from Cody winning that Hell in a Cell with one arm, because I still
Yeah,
don't know why
I don't think
and
I've
how
ever
he
seen
won.
that match all the way through, so I'd be okay with that.
Yeah.
That's pretty wild. That his pec looks. I always forget how disgusting that looks. That's insane.
We'll talk about it more when we watch the episodes again.
I think it's on the list either soon or later, but definitely coming up for sure. Thank you all so much for listening, and remember, the truth will set you free.